Call on private local order of the day number 2.
Amendment Bill, second reading.
Mr. Speaker.
Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Royal Society of New Zealand Amendment Bill be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, the Royal Society of New Zealand Amendment Bill is a private bill promoted by the Royal Society of New Zealand, which will amend the Royal Society of New Zealand Act, and I'm proud to bring it before the House as the local member in which the Royal Society of New Zealand is housed. The Education and Science Committee have been considering the bill, and they reported back to the House on the 11th of March and recommended that the bill proceed with several amendments. I'd particularly like to thank the members of the Education and Science Select Committee for their hard work in looking at this bill and understanding the submissions that came to the committee and making the amendments that they have. The main purpose of this bill is to amend the Royal Society of New Zealand Act to incorporate humanities into the objects and functions of the Society. This was based, Mr. Speaker, on a Memorandum of Understanding signed by the Society and the Council for the Humanities in February 2010 to incorporate the humanities into the Society. The bill expands the objects of the Society to include the advancement and promotion of New Zealand of humanities, in addition to science and technology. The functions of the Society will also be expanded to include functions relating to the humanities, such as fostering in the New Zealand community a culture that supports the humanities and encouraging, promoting and recognising excellence in the humanities. The incorporation of the humanities into the objects and functions of the Society will also mean that people involved in the humanities may be admitted as members of the Society, and that people who have achieved distinction in research or the advancement of the humanities will be able to be elected as fellows of the Society. The Society will also be required to establish and administer a code of professional standards and ethics in the humanities, as it currently does in relation to science and technology. Mr. Speaker, the Education and Science Committee has recommended a change to the definition of humanities in Clause 5.2 of this bill by omitting specific mentions of English and American studies. Members of the committee may choose to share with the House some of the logic around that. As I understand it, Mr. Speaker, it's to do with duplication, in that English is dealt with under the question of languages, and perhaps American studies under the question of cultural studies. Questions have been asked in the process of this bill, Mr. Speaker, around some other subject areas that are not mentioned under the definition of humanities, and while I retain an open mind as the member sponsoring this bill to exactly how we should describe the humanities, and I'm more than happy to talk to people as we move into the committee stage about whether we have that definition right. I think it's important to note that in addition to traditional science and technology, the social sciences are already part of the Royal Society's work, and I think that will include a number of the disciplines that people have been concerned about not being specifically mentioned in the list of humanities at the moment. Yes, and social sciences perhaps, for instance, could include political science, and that is one example. But I am, as I say, more than happy as we move into the committee stages to make sure we do have a full consensus in the House about the way in which we are describing the humanities in this bill. I think most members of the House would acknowledge when a piece of legislation has an exhaustive list of any particular thing under a definition, what's not there becomes a concern to people. And so I think the committee has done its best to come up with a coherent list there, but we do need to make sure that we have consensus on that. So we can talk about that as we go into the committee stages if members of the committee of the whole would like to do that. Mr. Speaker, there was in the submission process that the Select Committee dealt with a submission from the Royal Society's Wellington branch. And I do think it's worth noting, Mr. Speaker, that the Royal Society's Wellington branch did express some concerns around the question of the bringing in of the humanities into the Royal Society. And I think, it's a good thing when bills are sent to a select committee, which from time to time the current government has not done. And I think this is an example of where even on a non-controversial bill, there was some debate, and it's important that we have good faith with those people who make submissions that we can actually talk about that now. And the objections that the Royal Society's Wellington branch raised were essentially around their concern that by bringing bringing humanities in, there would be some dilution of the focus on science and technology. And that's a concern, I guess, that people who've been working in the framework of the Royal Society for many years may well have. And a concern from some branch members that the significance of science may reduce in the activities. It's clear that the committee's considered this and decided that they're comfortable with where things have reached. Certainly the Royal Society itself feel that the process of making the decision was one that was taken seriously. The Council of the Royal Society debated it thoroughly and worked through over really quite a long period, a year or more, to work out how to make sure that the incorporation of the humanities still allowed for sciences to be able to flourish. And on a personal level, Mr. Speaker, I think actually the incorporation of humanities is very important. Because if New Zealand really is going to grow its economy, we need to bring together the innovation that comes from the humanities and social sciences and marry that up with hardcore sciences and technology. And Sir Paul Callaghan, who spoke here recently at a Speakers' Science Forum, who is a Fellow of the Royal Society, he spoke very much and has in the past about this important issue. The merging together of the clever minds of New Zealanders, the people who've brought us Weta Digital and so on, the designers, the people who can conceptualise design, bringing those people together with the hard scientists, that's the way that we're going to get innovation in our country. And I think when we look at the objects of the Royal Society as they currently stand, I think that's understood. So while I can appreciate that some people involved in the Royal Society may have concerns about the dilution of science and technology, I actually believe this will strengthen the Royal Society by bringing humanities in, by broadening out the objects and the functions of the Society to take into account the humanities and actually start to bring together some of those synergies that have been mentioned. I also just want to note, because there was some concern again in that submission about whether there had been sufficient consultation. As I said, the Council of the Royal Society discussed this matter as far back as March 2009. It was discussed at the Fellows AGM in November 2009 and then found its way through by late November 2009 to be formally adopted and through into January 2010 when it was announced. So, and the Memorandum of Understanding between the Humanities Council and the Royal Society was signed on the 9th of February 2010. So a process was gone through by which Fellows and those involved in the Royal Society Council were able to discuss this, and I think the decision taken was certainly the right one. Mr. Speaker, there is also a slight change being made by the Select Committee around the election of members, or the appointment actually of members to the Academy Council. The process of changing the Academy Council was one that again went through some significant discussion and I think it's important obviously when one changes the objects and functions of an organisation like the Royal Society that we're able to have the Council operate in a way that goes along with those changes in the functions. But again, just in the interest of democracy, it's worth noting that the Fellows of the Society had a vote around this and 97 of the Fellows were in favour and just 2 against.
Well, I'm not sure. 1%.
No, 97 actual people and 2 against.
Okay.
It's not a percentage.
Right.
Scientists beside me here always thinking in percentage terms. So overwhelmingly the Fellows of the Society were comfortable with the decision to change the structure of the Council, but the Education and Science Committee has just slightly amended the words around here which relate to the appointment of a person as a member of the Society's Council by the Society's regional constituent organisations, just to make that make sense. So, Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to move the second reading of this bill. I think it's going to be an advance forward. We on this side of the House are committed to New Zealand being an innovative country, being a country that supports education and science and technology, that invests in education and science and technology. We think that's how we'll provide opportunities for future generations of New Zealanders, not cutting funding to science, not taking science advisors out of schools, and not ignoring the evidence and the research that's important in policy making and elsewhere. So we see this bill as a step forward, an advance for the Royal Society, and one that I hope all members of the House will be able to support.
Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Dr. Wayne